Well, here we are again, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. I'm Scott Martin. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'm from Bonsai Matsu, you know that. What a week it's been. It's been busy. It's that time of the year for me where I seem to be enormously busy, which is not bad busy, it's good busy. I really enjoy it. It's a time when I get to do a lot of work on my pines of all different varieties, as well as a lot of customers, different trees, and I find that it's a very satisfying time. If you have a look on Bonsai Matsu YouTube channel, you'll see there's been a couple of trees put up there recently that I've worked on, a couple of changes made, bit of wiring and styling and that sort of stuff, and it's been very exciting. So I want to portray or pass on to you my enthusiasm, because I'm jumping out of my skin at the moment. When I finish this podcast, I know I've got another couple of trees, I think it's 3 lined up in the workshop, little ones to finish before I get on to having some food. So it's I try and slot these things in between all little gaps that I have in my day, just to make sure that I can get them all done, because I'm on the downhill slide now to getting this thing finished. Got to be done before repotting season starts. So it's needle plucking, it's cutting, it's wiring, it's shaping. It's just, I don't know, I find it really satisfying when you can finally work on a tree that's been allowed to grow quite well, you know, for the last 5 or 6 months, and then make it look beautiful again and transform it and find that beauty within that may not be there when you first look at the tree. So it's a really busy time. And also I've done other things. Went away. There's a place in Victoria called Warburton. If you don't know where it is, you should check it out. It's very, very natural. There's a place we stayed at right beside the river. So as you went to sleep at night, you could hear the river flowing, and because it's very cold, and there was fire pits, so you could light a fire and sit around that and have a couple of beers and listen to the river flowing. And people were catching trout, not me, of course, but people were catching trout. I tried, but I couldn't get any. And there's a place near there called the Redwood Forest, and it's a mature plantation of these redwoods that are just incredible, just absolutely stunning. And I tell you, there's something special about being in a mature forest. You know, it's man-made. It's not natural, of course, not native to Australia, but these things are magnificent. And when you stand in their presence, oh my God, what a way to fill your cup. It's a bloody incredible experience. I really enjoyed it. Another great experience too. Now, I was working in the workshop the other night, and I chose not to have any TV, any distractions, just want to focus purely on the trees that I was working on. So I played some music in the background, and there was this song came on by the Dead Milkmen, Punk Rock Girl, and I remembered, like, it's seriously, I had a flashback to when I was 16 years old, when I was sitting on a bus on the way to school, and I remember this so vividly that someone grabbed me and said, "Hey, have a listen to this, whack the headphones on from the Walkman and have a listen to this band." And I remember it being absolutely gobsmacked at the time when I heard this song, going, "Oh my God, Dead Milkmen, they're amazing." And it just happened to be in my playlist that I had on, and it came out, and it was transformative. And I feel like that sort of thing happens with me when I work on the trees more. I get greater clarity on things. I feel more connected, and I just feel really lucky and happy. And bonsai's got this magic way of reaching deep into your soul and grabbing hold of you and saying, "You know what, mate, it's going to be all right." It's going to be all right. No matter what it is that's going through your head, bit of time with me, and I promise you'll feel better. So it's been a really good week this week. I can tell you, I've got bloody sore wrists from plucking needles, and I've got little cuts on the tips of my fingers because I use them as a stop point for the scissors when I go through to cut through the buds when there's a lot of growth around. So I've got little cuts on the end of my fingers, but it's been good. And another community service announcement, I suppose the scams are starting to fly up again. A few of my trees are getting used out there, and thanks to Adam and a few others that notified me about it and let me know to try and stop them as much as I can. But it's just one of those things that if you see it, call it out, let me know, and we'll sort it out. But anyway, let's get into this podcast. I want to talk about when you create a second problem by fixing the first problem. Had it happen the other day. Want to talk about that. Also, I want to talk about a bending technique that I use, because now's a great time to be in there and bending your trees and shaping and styling and all that sort of stuff. So I want to talk about a technique that I use that hopefully can help you when you are doing the work yourself. And it may not necessarily involve, major work. It's just a technique that may help. And as well as another thing that I've done recently is flower removal on an azalea. And I can tell you, now I know what the kid at school felt like when he was plucking wings off flies. It's not the best task in the world, but it's absolutely essential, and I wanted to have a quick chat about that. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So we were looking, I was doing a Zoom with a great Bonsai Matsu customer, David, and we were looking at a tree of his and having a talk about it, and there was an issue with regard to the positioning of the trunk and how far it fell back, and whether that could be corrected by an angle change when it was repotted, whether it should be bent, whether it should be whatever it is. And I wanted to talk about it not in relation to exactly what happened in regard to this particular case, but from the point of view that it's quite often and very common that when you're working with your bonsai, that you'll fix one problem or an issue, not a problem, but you'll fix something with regard to something that's happening with your tree that you don't like, but by doing that, you'll create a second problem. So by fixing one thing, you open yourself up to exposure to another problem. And often you can't see it until it's done. And it's just a reminder, or just the way I suppose that my head goes around the thought process. If it involves the pruning, the removal of something, then it's really got to be something that you are absolutely 100% certain has got to happen. It's a terrible mistake or travesty or a setback, if you like, for want of a better word, to go through and do something when there's an unseen consequence to it that may be actually worse or create more of a problem for you than the original issue that you had. A lot of times this stuff comes with experience, and there's no easy way to get around it. But trying to visualize it by covering things up with like a cloth or tea towel or something like that, or maybe getting on your phone and visually drawing and adjusting and doing things, or an editing piece of software that you can get hold of. That may be a really nice way of seeing future issues that you've got with your trees that may be exposed or that may occur purely as a result of what you've done with it. And the one that I'm talking about is we had this trunk leaning back, and as it sort of came up towards the apex looked like it was sort of maybe a little bit on the backside, but it could come forward a little bit. So by standing the tree up a little bit more vertical, or another scenario would be if you're laying the trunk back to get rid of something, to take the straightness of the lower part of the trunk and laying it back, which I do. It's really, really common for something that I do, is to lay the trunk back so it goes away from the viewer and then it starts to come up and come forward. And what happened was, when we adjusted the trunk angle, the next section of the trunk that was actually really nice in the original position suddenly became very straight, like very vertical, and there was no way around that. So by fixing a lower trunk issue, we created a mid trunk issue. And like I said, that is super common when it comes to trunks and adjusting angles on things, because you're focusing so hard, you're zoomed in so close on what it is that you're trying to fix, that as soon as you fix it, you go, yep, done, that's it, perfect, I'm moving on. But you need to look further and dig a little bit deeper and just sign off on everything else up higher up the tree. What about branch placement? If you move the trunk, does that mean then a branch suddenly is going to start dipping down too far? If you bring it up, what's the impact going to be with that? Is it going to adjust anything? Is it able to be bent and adjusted to the new angle that will suit the new trunk position? There's just a lot that has to go through the sign-off process before you make these changes. It's really easy to tilt a tree back and say, yep, that's the future angle of the tree. But you need to make sure that you're not creating a second problem that can't be resolved. Luckily, everything went out really well because we were chatting about this thing and David came up with the idea and said, hey, listen, what if we, instead of, angle changing, what if we did, use heavy wire and bent it and did whatever, and it worked beautifully. So problem was solved. It's just that was the catalyst. That incident was the catalyst for looking at things and saying, hey, to fix one thing, you create another problem. It's like the lady that swallowed the fly. If you remember that when you're a kid, that one thing leads to something else, which gets gradually worse and worse every time. It's not always the case, but it's just that your mind has to be and your focus has to be on ensuring that what you're doing is a step forward, and it's not a sideways shuffle, and you're just kicking the problem down the road to another future issue that you're going to have to resolve. Foliage is great; it can hide a lot of stuff, but good structure is good bonsai, and if you can get it right by just maybe doing something a little bit different and seeing things a bit out of the box rather than just the first thing that comes to your head and jumping into it, that might be something you can't turn the clock back on. Even if it was an angle change and you could fix it, what are you going to wait? Another 2 years or 3 years with the tree being repotted to settle in to make sure that it's stabilised before you make that change again? I think you're better off just looking at things a little closer, seeing what the impact is, the flow-on effect of whatever it is that you're going to do before you actually do it. And like I said, experience kicks into that a lot of the time, but also drawing breath, going a little bit slower and making sure that things are spot on before you take a step that's not something you can turn back. Okay, so with bonsai, with the artistic side, with the horticultural side, with everything to do with bonsai, it involves manipulation of some kind. There's no simple way of getting around that. Whatever it is, whether you're pruning, you're potting, you're carving, you're doing whatever it is, it's a form of manipulation on the tree. And there's always got to be a proviso, an oversight that the tree is strong enough and healthy enough to not only withstand, that's horrible. It sounds like you're going to kick the Christ out of this thing, but no, it's got to be strong enough to handle whatever is done to it in any shape or any form, and then take steps forward. All right, so that's the background before I start talking about this technique that I'd like you to consider when you're starting to bend your trees. Now's a great time for working on pines. The sap flows are really starting to slow down. They become really quite flexible. You can get in there and clean them out before they start their spring growth, and everything starts flooding through the tree, and all that vascular tissue starts to become quite rigid and brittle, and there can be an issue with bending it. So what I like to do when I'm bending my trees is you can use, if it's a serious bend and you think you're going to tear, that's not what I'm talking about here. So if you think you're going to be tearing and sort of doing some serious damage to a tree with a bend, then you need to take precautions. You need to use things like raffia or whatever technique it is that you use. For me, it's raffia and tape and protect the moisture loss around the branch or the part of the tree that's going to be cracked or torn, and make sure that it's going to be able to bounce back and not get dieback or not die from what you've done to it. So what I'm talking about here is the technique that I want to talk about that I use is where I'm bending something. And I've just recently been at school. I teach a group of young boys bonsai every week, which is the highlight of my week, to be honest. And they were working on little junipers, procumbens junipers, little stock standard little trees. Trunks are about as thick as your thumb, and they're really quite pliable. Like they bounce back really well when they're managed correctly. And one of the techniques I use is obviously you've got to wire whatever it is that you're going to be bending first, and I always try and step the wire up a little bit stronger than probably what it needs to be, just so I never have to wire that thing again. So if we're wiring the trunk of a tree and it's as thick as your thumb and it's quite significant, that the technique is that you can take it and you can make sure that the wire is on the outside of the bend. That's a given. Okay, I've talked about that before, so I'm not going to cover off on that. But the technique is where you gently flex and bend. So you just pulse the branch or the trunk or whatever it is, just ensuring that your thumb's in the point of the bend, in the fulcrum, in the position where you want it to bend, which is on the inside of where the wire is, and just keep flexing it gently, just gently, and you'll find that the trunk or the branch or whatever it is that you're trying to bend slowly starts to flex and starts to come into a position where you'll be quite happy with it for what you want to achieve. It's not good, I don't use that technique if I'm going to be bending, let's say, very close to the trunk for a branch where I want to get an acute bend on it. Then I'd use something like a steel bar to make sure that I can pinpoint exactly where I want the bend to be, or use a pair of pliers, the two-ply technique where I hold at one point with the pliers to stop the bend. Second pair of pliers grabs the wire and bends the branch down exactly where I want it to go from the point where I'm holding the wire steady. But this is more for when you're starting to flex and you want curvature. Like you want to go gently start sweeping around, from left to right. Then you start putting your thumb on the inside of that bend and arcing it down, and you'll find that the trunk or the branch will start to bend. It's really useful for more brittle species like, let's say it's a trident maple that's possibly got a bit too much juice in its system, and those branches want to break. That flexing I find just gentle. I'm not talking, flexing it for 4 or 5 centimetres. It's just a gentle flex of a little bit by little bit by little bit. And you'll feel by doing that where the branch or the trunk, the foliage, whatever it is, has got a give point. Like you'll feel it'll go quite easy, then it'll get a bit stiffer, then let go, then do it again. Easy, then it gets a bit stiffer. And you'll find that as you do that, as you sort of massage that tissue, it gets a little bit softer and a little bit softer and a little bit softer, and it becomes a little bit easier to bend. And that's why I like using the heavier wire, because I don't just want to flex this thing like a piece of cane and where I'm flicking it backwards and forwards. I want it, as I bend it, for that wire to kick in and go, right now, stop. You've told me to bend to there, that's the point. And then it sort of might give back a little bit, but nowhere near as much as it was to the original position. And I find that I keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and I can get to exactly where I want. Try not to overdo it. Try not to go past the point that you're happy with the bend. Try and get it so you can do it a little bit, do it a little bit, do it a little bit, stop, review, have a look. Is it far enough? Do I meet my criteria? Am I happy? Does the design look good? No, it's not. A little bit further. Do it. All right, stop, review, have a look. Happy? Yes, no, okay, a bit more. And that way you avoid having to go, oh, hang on, I've gone too far, and then forcing it to go back again. It's I don't know if traumatic's the right word, but it's an experience that the tree probably doesn't want to go through, that flexing, that bending, and then the realignment going back to the original position or back closer towards the original position. It's just something that if you do it right and you consider it and you're thinking about the tree, then you shouldn't have to do it. So just do it slowly. What I don't like with these bends is a rapid jerky movement. Rapid jerky movement results in breakage and snapping or damage. It's just unnecessary. It's that tearing of the fibres that happens because you do something too fast. Slow down, take a couple of minutes, just slowly flex, stop, review, flex, stop, review. And you can get in there nice and close with your hands and you can feel the tree. You can feel those fibres in your hands that you'll get more and more experience doing. And you'll find that it's a nice way of trying to avoid breakage. And when it comes to a more brittle experience, let's say it's an Azalea or it's even some natives, some of our Australian natives, the technique of double wiring. So you run one wire down the branch, then the second wire gets put into the middle position between those other two wires, the other wire that's there. So you run two wires in tandem, but not back to back, not touching each other. Sort of the second wire comes in the gap in between that first wire as it arcs down the branch or down the trunk. So therefore your contact points are doubled with the wire as you bend and flex to support the outside of the bend. And it makes it less likely that it's going to crack or break. It helps a lot doing that. But that flexing technique as you're bending some of the natives and just going slowly can make a massive difference to your success rate. And if you find that you're doing it and you're breaking, then just slow down a little bit. That this withholding watering for maybe a day before you're doing something like this can definitely help. I find that I don't really have to worry about that because I know that I'm very gentle when I do it, and I'm never going to get to the point where the tree's got that much fluid in it. I'd wait till a time of the year when the tree's heading towards a dormancy period, like just now for us. We're talking about being very late in May. That allows me to do a little bit more, a lot safer, which is ideal. It's perfect. It's the best time for me to be doing that stuff. But if, like I said, this technique, if you feel that you need raffia, then you can use all different types of techniques with steel bars and whatever else. But this is more that flexing, that feeling the fibres and just gently doing it bit by bit, letting the wire take up the slack, get the tree or branch into the position that you want, then stop and then move on to the next part of the trunk and flex it there. You might be finding that you're going down with one bend and then the next one's coming up and the next one's going left and the next one's going right. Well, you can keep doing it as you walk your way down the branch to get that extra movement in the branch. But I find that when it's a thicker branch or bit of the tree that you're dealing with, that gentle flex that you can do, that pulsing flex, it's a great one. It's a really good technique. It's not hard to learn. Just make sure that you give it enough oomph to get the bend in place. And the trick with it is that wire size, the gauge of the wire, the thickness, the strength of the wire that you're using to make sure that it actually is strong enough to hold the tree or branch in the position that you want it set in. I have found that this technique is actually really good for height reduction too, because often, as you get up higher up the tree, the trunk starts to get a little bit thinner, obviously with taper, and therefore, with that reduction in thickness, you'll find that there's the increase in flexibility. And, I used it recently to reduce the height of a Scots pine, where it was just that gentle flex, bringing it down, curving the trunk, getting a bit of extra movement to marry what was below it in the beautiful base of the tree. And lo and behold, you've got, you knock the height down of the tree significantly and you get extra movement in the trunk line as well, which creates extra interest. You can ensure that you've got branches on the outside of your bends. Everything starts to fall into place. So it's just a really nice, good technique that's very safe as long as you do it slowly and thoroughly. And you've got good contact on that branch and you don't do it really swiftly, you'll find that it's a really good technique to get nice bends into your trunk and your branches. Azaleas, I love them. But I have this relationship with them where I love them and they love to die. They're bloody painful. No, I love them. I do, and I've got a beautiful big old Karoom Azalea that flowers like crazy. It just looks magnificent. Beautiful, healthy foliage. There's so much to love about this tree. But I have found them to be very delicate when it comes to things like repotting and transitioning from a garden grow tub to a bonsai pot. I find that can be something which is a little tricky to manage, and that those roots like to be nice and well contained. But anyway, the point for talking about now is when to remove flowers and flower removal on azaleas, which is one of those tasks that A lot of what we do with bonsai, as I've talked about plenty of times, it's not glamorous. It's definitely not destined to be on your reels on social media or highlight on the on your old YouTube channel. It's definitely something which you grunt your way through because you know that there's something really good the other side of it. And flower removal, once they've turned the corner and they start to look that crappier side, and they start to maybe drop the petals or they start to look all scrunched up and ugly, that's when I know I've got to do something. Even if there's probably, let's say, 10-15% of good flowers on the tree, or there's probably another 5% on top of that which are still at the bud stage, which are ready to come out. That's the trigger for me. When I look over the tree and I see the majority of flowers have turned the corner and they're starting to wilt, that's the time for me to get out the scissors and put the thing on the bench and do flower removal. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit for timing-wise. Timing is exactly as I said, when I see probably about 80% of the tree with the flowers starting to wilt, that's the timing for me to get in there and do it. And different varieties, different species, different climates, different everything means that they flower at different times. And I get the feeling lately that mine seems to be flowering a lot more frequently than it used to. It doesn't seem to be a yearly cycle anymore. It feels to me like it's less than that. I haven't actually recorded the dates, but it's just a feel that I get. Maybe that's because removing the flowers can take me 5 or 6 hours of straight working on the tree, but it's definitely feels like it's something which gets done a bit more frequently than yearly. The other thing I want to talk about is the reason why. Now, I always think with your bonsai that they've got limited resources. They're in a pot, they're not in the ground. They can't just get what they need when they need it. It's up to you or us to make sure that we give it to them, that we care for them as best we possibly can. And when they start allocating resources or energy to something which is going to be completely useless to us, it's a waste. You've got 3 branches growing from one spot. We only want 2 because if 3 grow from that spot, then you're going to get swelling and an ugly knuckle, which you're going to have to cut off somewhere down the track. So if you don't remove it, you don't clean it up, those 3 branches get resources allocated to them, and then somewhere down the track you'll come and cut it back to 2. So the resources that could have been spent on 2 branches or gone to those really weak inner buds on that branch have been wasted because it's gone to a 3rd branch, which is going to get removed anyway. So with that thought process in mind, I look at the production of flowers. It's reproduction for the trees. Okay, so it's all about survival of the tree, of the species, where they'll go into a mode of creating flowers or growing flowers to produce seed. Now, once the flowers have done their thing, been pollinated, all the rest of it, all the birds and the bees get involved, then the seed production starts to take place. Now, that's a use of resources for that particular tree that I don't want to have happen. I want the resources to go towards new growth. New growth comes after the flowering period, and in between that period between flowering and new growth is the seed production. So what I do is I make sure that I go through and I cut off everything so the tree doesn't waste resources. It puts all its energy towards new growth, which for me has worked really, really well because I've got bucket loads of growth on this thing. It's so happy, it's so healthy, it's lush, it looks great, develops lots of flower buds based on the timing of my pruning, that I'm not pruning off those new flower buds that are forming. And it all just seems to work, which is awesome. So I go in there and I remove the entire flower right back to its very base. All right, so that's the technique. The process for it is to get in there with very sharp scissors, follow back the flower, look where its base is, go below the base and cut that off completely. Leave nothing on there. Don't cut halfway through. Don't just cut through the petals on the flower. I know I have seen people get in there and pinch it with their fingernails. My fingernails aren't long enough. I have seen people just pluck it off as well. I find that can really do probably more damage for me, in my experience, than using scissors. So I just get really sharp scissors, get in there, work from top down, like any cleaning process you do on your bonsai. You're cleaning from the center point at the highest point on the tree, and you're working your way out towards the periphery of the tree. Keep spinning it around, working round and round and round. So you go from one area to the next, but it's that complete flower removal and cutting that makes a hell of a mess. But it's like, I feel that and it doesn't happen, but I feel that when I'm finished, the tree sort of goes, oh, that's so good. It's like there's no stress now. Like I don't have to, there's no pressure on me to feel the need to produce these seeds. Like I can put more of what I am into new growth as opposed to something which is just, possibly going to start to reduce the overall strength and vitality of the tree and cause dieback in different areas of the tree. So what I do when I'm also doing that is I take the opportunity to prune and clean up the tree. If I see that there's knuckles of growth, azaleas are great for punching out 400 new bits of growth from every single spot on the tree. If I find that the tree is strong enough and I hesitated, then you probably heard that in my voice. I almost wasn't going to say this, but I think I will. I have found that if the tree is strong enough, then sometimes, there's my disclaimer, sometimes I can cut back to bare wood and the tree will backbud and push out growth. They do, and again, I'm hesitating because this isn't always the case, but I've found that when they're in good condition, majority of the time I can do that and they'll backbud from really old wood on the tree, which is a lovely quality to have. It's really, really nice. But I've also found that when I've done it, when the tree probably hasn't been at peak condition, I've just got into, dreary old automatic zone mode when I just get in and punch out the work. When I've done that sort of stuff, I find that, there can be long bits of dieback on some longer branches where it just hasn't backbutted like I'd expect. So it's a roll of the dice, which is, I don't like talking about that sort of stuff on the podcast because I like to try and be definitive. But that health assessment that you do on it, you've really got to, if you've got a really long branch that, one, it's too long for the tree, and secondly, if you don't get backbutting, it's going to get cut off, then they're the ideal opportunity when the tree is strong enough. I'm repeating myself over and over because I'm worried that someone's going to do this and lop off half their azalea and expect backbutting and not get it, and it's going to die and it's going to be my fault. But if you have a branch that's too long that if you don't get backbutting on, you're going to remove anyway, then my approach is to have a go. If I've got it strong enough and it's fit enough and it's ready to go, and I look and I can see there's lots of buds starting to pop everywhere and there's lots of new growth on this thing and it's looking great, There's no bugs on it anywhere. There's no damaged leaves. It's not, on its last breath. Then I take the chance with those branches because, like I said, I'm going to remove the bloody thing anyway. And so I may as well roll the dice and see if it's going to backbud. And if it doesn't, well, you know what? By the time I get around to looking at it again in 6 months' time, other things will have grown in that area because I've opened the foliage up by pruning out that bit of foliage and letting more sunlight and air in there. So there might be backbudding somewhere else. So it's not something that I cut and go out there every day and look at and watch and go, come on, buddy, you've got a backbud, because I know that if I get the tree strong enough and healthy enough, it's going to backbud somewhere else anyway. So that's the opportunity that I take at that time, is to get in there when the flowers all get cut off, give it a bit of a prune back as well, because when that new foliage then starts to come out, there's the potential once it reaches maturity to start pushing out and developing flower buds. So I like to get in at this early stage, and if there are some more flower buds floating around, knocking them off and cutting them off for me now saves me having to bring the tree back into the workshop in a couple of weeks' time when those flower buds start to die and then they start to produce seed. So I'm a bit more aggressive, a bit more thorough. That's the right word, not aggressive. I'm a bit more thorough with the work that I do at this time to make sure that it's all cut back and looks nice. So take this for future work on your azaleas. It might not be something that you're going to be doing necessarily during this week of the podcast, but it's just something that I've done in the last 2 weeks. I thought that's an interesting one to talk about, and because they can be a little bit unknown how to manage the azaleas, and you'll often buy them because you see them in a nursery and they look beautiful. There's a flower on it that's great. It's maybe multicoloured. It might be bright. It might have really nice foliage. It could be whatever it is that you love, but I find that a really simplistic way to look after them is wait till they're flowered, get in there as the flowers are probably about 80% done, cut them all off, give it a bit of a prune as well back at that stage. If it's strong enough, look to reduce those long branches back to try and get some back budding in there. Do a little bit of wire very carefully. Like, they are an absolute mongrel to wire because they are brittle and they can snap with absolute zero warning. So always make sure the wire's on the outside of where you want the bend to be. Good practice for every time, but I can guarantee you Azaleas will let you know if the wire's on the inside of the bend. So when it happens, don't say you should have told me, because I've told you. But they're a lovely, lovely species. They are on the more advanced side of things. They are very delicate. They can turn the corner without notice, years after being repotted. I've heard stories where people go, it's repotted 2 years ago. Everything's been fine. And then this year it's just gone brown and it's died on me. I can't help everybody with everything. I can't answer all the questions on them. I do love the species. I think that what I get out of them is brilliant. They are a lot of work as they get to the more advanced stages of their life, but that's the reason why I don't have many in my collection, because they are a hell of a lot of work and they are very, very picky. But if you do have them, if you do love them, if you've got the right environment, if you've got the knack to look after these things, then, share that information with the rest of the world, because they're magnificent bonsai species that should be enjoyed. Well, that podcast had everything from the dead milkman to pulling wings off flies. It was. It's an interesting time of year. I find that I have a bit of a spring in my step at the moment. I do get at times I do get a bit overwhelmed by the amount of work and messages and contact, and it can seem that there's just never an end to this stuff. But then I tell myself that it's the same every year, and you do get through it, and I love it when I sit back and I think about things and I'm not actually doing something. I can feel a little bit overwhelmed, thinking, oh God, that bench is still full. That's still 3/4 full. There's that one on the podium. There's that one. That one there's at least a day and a half worth of work. I've got this visit to do. I've got that course to run. I've got that workshop. I've got these messages to answer for people. And then I just draw a breath and just think, you know what, one step at a time. That's all you can do. The marathon is run one step at a time, and you get there in the end. It might take a little bit longer. You might not be able to do things immediately, but by planning, by allocating your time, by making sure that you don't rush, that you don't make mistakes, that you enjoy the ride, enjoy the process, enjoy every single second of it. Because I know that when I'm into those trees, when I'm neck deep in them, that's when I'm at my best. That's when I love it the most. When I'm getting it off the bench, I look at it and think, "Oh, that's a lot of work." Goes onto the bench, draw a deep breath, put the trolley down low, start at the apex, start with a needle plucking. I start getting into it, thinking, "Oh God." Then when I get past the apex and I start moving onto a branch, it's just a numbers game. Like, it's just, okay, there might be 50 branches on this tree, but there's still only 50 branches. And when you've done this one, there's one less. There's only 49. And you can start working through and play these little mind games with myself every single time when I'm working through things. But I get to a point where then it suddenly becomes really enjoyable, because you're suddenly looking at it going, yeah, have a look at this. This is actually becoming exactly what you want it to be. So don't rush it. Just take your time. Make sure that you spend that extra little bit on it. Make sure that it gets to exactly where you want it to get to. And that's the best advice I can give you is, if you've got pines or if you've got any kind of, needle variety, junipers, whatever it is, that this is just a busy time. And the next busy time is repotting, and the next busy time is spring pruning. And there's always busy times. Let me tell you, bonsai is always busy because we have limits on what can be done and when it can be done at the optimum time. Most thing, everything you can do at whatever time you want. Is it going to give you the result you want? I guarantee it's not going to. So that's why we get busy during peak periods for certain species. And it can seem overwhelming, but spending time with your trees, no matter what it is, it's so good for us. It's so good to invigorate and lift the spirit and just change your day in every format, in every structure. And I hear it from so many people that message me about it, and I know it gets through, and I know that anyone that's listening to this podcast feels exactly the same way as what I do. And I'm hoping that what you're listening to is infectious, and it inspires you to grab your tweezers and your scissors, and even just walk out around the yard. Get yourself a cup of tea and just walk around the yard and look at your trees. You don't need 1,000,000 of these things to be happy. You can have 1 or 2. You can have 300. You can have 10. It doesn't make a difference. But what we get out of it is that same endorphin rush, that same beautiful feeling that being around trees give you. Like I said at the start about the redwood forest at Warburton. That I've just had hair stand up on my arms just saying it again, because it's such a nice experience. If you're lucky enough to live in an environment where you can, walk down your street and see beautiful trees. You don't need to be in the forest. You don't need to be in the outback of Australia or, in the Rocky Mountains to appreciate trees. Anywhere you are, just spending time with them and stopping and staring and appreciating and marveling at the absolute magnificence of these things. We're so lucky that we get to keep them in our backyard in little pots and work with them and encourage them and nurture them and make them more than what they would have been if they'd continued life as the seed that got put into the dirt or the cutting that was taken. So we're really fortunate. I love every second of it, and I really look forward to sharing this podcast with you for that very reason. So thanks for listening as always. Keep a smile on your dial. Spend time with your trees. Check out the Bonsai Matsu YouTube channel. A new one's just gone up where I've worked and styled and done a bit of height reduction on Japanese black pine. So check that one out and stick around, because next podcast only a few days away now. So till next time, happy bonsai.